Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is the monthly wrap-up for March of 2022. So I had a pretty decent reading month for March, filming this almost halfway through April, but that's become pretty typical for me at this point, late with these types of videos. I did finish two larger historical works and then a couple of shorter books. One of the first things that I finished that I began in February and finished in March was the Hemmingses of Monticello. And I should say all of these books that I'm talking about, I have spoken of more at length previously in previous videos, my Fresh Read Kills videos, or sometimes just more of a standalone video, which I think I did standalone for this one and the next one. And this was Annette Gordon Reed's look at the slave family at Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's plantation, the Hemmingses. A very unique story, a slave family who was very close to Jefferson, incredibly close in the case of Sally Hemings, who he, ended up fathering children with. And this is kind of a biography of a family, looking back, starting with Elizabeth Hemings, who was Sally Hemings' mother, and then going through Sally Hemings' generation with her brothers, and then kind of briefly looking at Sally's children. I do wish there was a little bit more with regard to that in this book, but Annette Gordon Reed does an excellent job with this. Some of the writing is really terrific. I love the middle section when Jefferson is in Paris in particular. And what I said in my video about this, I thought this was an excellent example of what I would call scholarly conjecture, because there is so much that we actually don't know for sure. These slaves were not writing things down. So she is constantly having to surmise and conjecture, but she does it in such a great way. She has a legal background, and she really knows how to present a case, even when there's scant evidence. But she does a profoundly impressive amount of research in order to state the cases that she does. So I really like this. This is probably, so far at least this year, in the first quarter of the year, probably my favorite book that I've read. Another book that I read that I also really enjoyed was this one here, the Landmark Thucydides. This is, of course, the Landmark edition, which is filled with all kinds of maps and footnotes and different explanatory text in the margins and essays in the back. Awesome additions to read these ancient historians. So Thucydides takes us through the Peloponnesian War, or at least most of it. He seems to have died, I'm guessing, before the end of the war. So he tries to kind of, in many ways, contrast himself with Herodotus, which of course was the previous generation's really historian. So he does not have any interest in ethnography. He doesn't go on tangents really. He just sticks to the military battles, and also he injects a lot of speeches in here to look at the war of ideas. And I really like this. I thought that book 7 especially, where the Athenians disastrously try to invade Syracuse, was just excellent stuff. The 8th chapter is kind of hurried and unfinished, and it does kind of leave you with a sense of dissatisfaction at the end. But otherwise, I'm really glad that I read this, and I really enjoyed it. And then I read 3 shorter works. Sorry for the shaking camera. They're on the same table here. I read Serve Cold, the HorrorTube Anthology, a collection of short horror stories, all dealing with cold, all coming from horror booktubers, and edited by R. St. Clair and Steve Donoghue. And this was a fun collection. I had said in my video about this, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect when I came into this, but I did find it to be a really enjoyable read, and a couple stories in particular really stood out as being quite exceptional. So glad I read this. And then I read 2 pretty short works. The first one being The Witchcraft of Salem Village by Shirley Jackson, the famous horror writer. She had written this for middle school audiences, or middle school readers, I should say, in the 1950s. And this was a really just good, insightful narrative history of the Salem witch trials. A very fast read, but even if adults were interested in just kind of getting a quick introduction to that historical event, I would recommend this. It was just a very readable, very insightful narrative history. So yes, this one I enjoyed quite a bit. And then I finished off the month with Women in Power, Manifesto by Mary Beard. Somebody who I had read SPQR. She is a classical historian, especially of ancient Rome. And this is about her looking at women as far as often being denied a public voice, or how women are meant to assume a more masculine position when they achieve power or when they are seeking power. And she goes through some of the historical precedents for each of those. But it's a very short text, not a lot of writing. Some pages are just completely, photographs or images. You can read this very quickly, within about an hour. And it's a conversation starter. This is not supposed to be the final word. This is just supposed to be, calling attention to an issue. These are actually two basically lectures that she gave that are combined into a book. And I'm glad that I read it. One of the things I mentioned in the video is that her contemporary references, they're 5 years old at this point, and so much has happened since then, they already start to feel kind of dated. So this is not a book that I'm necessarily going to hold on to, but once again, I am glad that I read it. And that is it. That is my monthly wrap-up. Once again, I've spoken about all of these books in more detail in previous videos. Sometimes, I'm sure, more effectively than other times. But that's what I read. I mostly make these monthly wrap-up videos for me as a way to kind of summarize my reading, something I can go back to see what I read, what my thoughts were, and if anybody, can watch these and get some information or insight, or can add their own insight, I certainly appreciate it. But this is what I read. So, got the Landmark Thucydides, the Hemmingses of Monticello by Annette Gordon-Reed, got Served Cold, the HorrorTube collection, Women in Power by Mary Beard, and The Witchcraft of Salem Village by Shirley Jackson. So, not a bad reading month. And I know I mentioned at least one of them. Both of these I started in February and finished in March. So, that's it. All right. As always, thank you, BookTube.